call this meeting to order. All right, first of all, again, we apologize for the confusion. We were understanding that there would be a different vote schedule, and we're going to make the best of this because obviously you've made your time available, and we're going to do our best to get some votes in, or excuse me, testimony will go to votes, and we'll come back and make sure that we do what is right for the American people and certainly for our military. So with that, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee hearing on Military Services Fiscal Year 22 budget request for Rotary Wing Aviation programs. We've lifted most of the COVID restrictions here in the House, but this is still a hybrid hearing, and that is so true. We have a few members that are participating remotely, although they are not on right now. We expect them. But if nobody's here, do I have to read it?
I think you do.
Okay, we'll cover ourselves. Okay, we have someone on there, so I have to read the mandatory language. I'd like to welcome the members who are joining us today. Joined here remotely, members who are participating remotely must be visible on screen for the purposes of identity verification, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceedings, and voting. Remote attended members must continue to use software platform video function the entire time while in attendance, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member experiences technical difficulties, they should contact committee staff for assistance. Video members participating will be broadcast in the room and via television and internet feeds. Members participating remotely must seek recognition verbally, and they are asked to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Remote members may leave and rejoin the proceedings. However, if remote members depart the hearing for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join different proceedings, they should exit the software program entirely and then rejoin it when they return. Members may use the software platform's chat feature to communicate with staff regarding only technical or logistical support issues. I've designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceedings. And with that, I will now give my opening statement. Welcome back. We obviously have a large and distinguished panel of witnesses here today, and I thank them for being on time, even though not all of us were, and making the time to have this discussion on what is incredibly important, the services Rotary Wing Aviation programs, and the process, certainly the challenges we need to be aware before we mark up the 22 National Defense Authorization Act. Rotary Wing aircraft serves diverse and unique purposes across the military branches, and each service is currently in different stages of modernization of its helicopter fleets. Successful modernization and sustainment of rotary wing aircraft will lay a solid foundation for the futures of the joint force. The Army is embarking on an ambitious lead future vertical lift, or FVL, aimed at developing and fielding 2 new major rotary platforms at the same time. Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, FARA, or Future Long-Range Assault Aircraft, FLORA. With future years' defense programs information this year's, with it not in here, it's difficult to assess what the FVL funding profile is going to be. However, subcommittee's understanding that the funding plan for the FLORA was never revised in the out years after the decision was made to accelerate the program by 4 years. Given the concurrent acquisition of these programs, the Army should explain how these programs will be appropriately resourced and what actions are being taken to manage the risks within the future vertical lift. As in last year's budget, the Army did not include procurement funding for the CH-47F Block 2 Chinook. Only the new Special Operations Forces aircraft are funded. The Chinook program is conducting additional testing on the advanced rotor blade now and should have sufficient data collected and analyzed for a production decision by the end of fiscal year 21. Certainly, we're interested in discussing the way ahead for the Chinook Block 2. With the Department of the Navy has completed acquisition of its fleet workhorse, the MH-60, and is beginning to plan the service life extension program to keep these aircraft relevant into the next decade, while the Marine Corps is in the testing phase of two new, the CH-53K heavy lift helicopter and the VH-92A, the replacement of the presidential helicopter program. After 15 years of development, the CH-53K program is still discovering new and operational difficulties that need to be corrected. And I understand some of those are already corrected, but granted, this is the purpose for the acquisition system program, to bring out these problems before fielding the systems. But obviously, the 53K program should be much further along at this point, and major problem discoveries is something that we hope not to expect any more of. Expect Marine Corps to explain how they anticipate controlling risk and the cost of this program. The Air Force is on their transitioning to a new combat rescue helicopter, the HH-60 Whiskey, and a replacement helicopter for the nuclear security missions, the MH-139 Grey Wolf. I expect the Air Force witnesses to provide updates on how these programs are progressing and justify their requests, or in this case, Grey Wolf, the lack of one for fiscal year 22. Finally, I'm interested in what each of the services are doing to increase survivability for the rotary wing fleet, and if and how they're working together to leverage research and investment in aircraft survivability equipment and for the common benefit. Our helicopter pilots and crews deserve the best self-protection and safety systems available. With that, I want to take a moment and recognize our ranking member of Tactical Air and Land, Mrs. Hartzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here with us today, and I look forward to receiving an update on the status of each service's unique rotary wing aviation programs and their plans for both the sustainment and modernization of their respective helicopter fleet capabilities. I remain deeply concerned that the President's FY22 budget request does not adequately resource our national security and further places military leadership in an untenable position of having to make impossible choices between near-term operational readiness, sustainment of enduring capabilities, and long-term modernization priorities. Today's hearing will provide an opportunity for us to gain a better insight of how each service's rotary wing aviation fleets have been impacted by this budget and whether any major changes to sustaining programs or future equipping and modernizing strategies will result. With shrinking budgets and shifting focus, it is critical that this subcommittee understands how each service views rotary wing aircraft fitting into their future modernization plans and what added capabilities will be required in multi-domain operations against a peer or near-peer challenge in the Indo-Pacific region. I expect our witnesses to discuss what major sustainment, readiness, and management issues each service is facing as you adapt your rotary wing aviation portfolio to this new operational focus. And what are you doing now to address these issues? I'm pleased to see that the Army is continuing to prioritize the development of a future vertical lift capability as one of its top 6 modernization priorities. The Army is clearly leading the way on future vertical lift, developing both the future attack and reconnaissance aircraft and the future long-range assault aircraft at the same time. I look forward to the discussion on both the development status and future potential of this major modernization effort. I also hope to hear how the Navy and Marine Corps are working with the Army and planning to capitalize on Army efforts and development in their own future vertical lift programs. Sustainment and modernization of existing rotary wing platforms is also critical. As we look forward toward the future of rotary wing aviation, We must not overlook the rotary wing aircraft currently playing a significant role in the missions and operations of our military services and our National Guard today. Some of these units have been waiting for necessary aircraft upgrades and replacements for quite some time. Near to my heart, we have the Army's 135th Assault Helicopter Battalion at Whiteman Air Force Base, who is anxiously awaiting the arrival of its UH-60M Blackhawks to replace its aging UH-60L fleet in 2023. And lastly, I expect each service to briefly discuss their current aircraft survivability equipment projects and developments. Helicopters fly low and relatively slowly, rendering them especially vulnerable to enemy weapons. I want to reemphasize the chairman's statement that our helicopter pilots, crews, and passengers deserve the best self-protection and safety systems available. This seems to be an area where jointness would be without debate, leveraging research and investment projects in aircraft survivability and safety for the common benefit of all our warfighters. I thank the chairman for organizing this important and timely hearing before we mark up our Fiscal Year 22 National Defense Authorization Act, and I yield back.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And let's turn to our witnesses. Today joining us is Mr. Doug Bush, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisitions, Logistics, and Technology, who we've had the honor of 2 CODELs that have been very informative. Good to have you here. Lieutenant General Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army for Programs. Mr. Stephanie is Acting Assistant Secretary of Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Lieutenant General Wise, Deputy Commandant for Aviation for the Marine Corps. Rear Admiral Andrew Loisel, did I get that right? Director of Air Warfare Division for Naval Operations. Ms. Darlene Costello, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Major General Moore, Director of Programs, Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force for Plans and Programs. We've asked for opening statements of 1 per service, and with that, Mr. Bush, please proceed with your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss the Army's rotary wing aviation portfolio and the resources requested in the President's budget for fiscal year 2022. I'm pleased to be joined today by my teammate, Lieutenant General Eric Peterson, Deputy Chief of Staff G8, as well as our Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force counterparts. We appreciate your making our written statement part of the record for today's hearing. Mr. Chairman, our shared mission in the Army is to ensure the Army continues to achieve overmatch against all potential adversaries, ensuring that our Army can fulfill its mandate to successfully deter and, if necessary, fight and win our nation's wars as part of the joint force. Next, I'd like to briefly take a moment to address the subcommittee's specific requests outlined in the invitation. First, the committee asked for an overview of Army aviation modernization and equipping strategies for FY22 that identified major planned changes in the strategy from FY21. Overall, I think the FY22 budget request for the Army reflects continuity and the Army's continued commitment to its high-priority modernization programs. While members will find adjustments were made to some programs, I believe that the FY22 budget request of $34.1 billion overall for Army research, development, and acquisition, which includes $2.8 billion for aviation procurement and $1.8 billion for aviation research and development, reflects careful choices and supports continued progress on the Army's top modernization priorities. Second, the committee asked for an explanation of major new modernization initiatives in FY22. In response, I would ask the committee members to review our joint witness statement that summarizes our ongoing efforts to modernize our current fleets, as well as the progress we are making to develop future platforms, such as the ones mentioned by the chairman, FARA, FLARA, and also future unmanned aircraft systems. Third, the committee asked for an identification and description and justification of unfunded priorities, major equipment shortfalls, and unacceptable risk. With regard to unfunded priorities, I would refer members to the Army Chief of Staff's unfunded priority list. In addition, I am not aware of any major equipment shortfalls or unacceptable risks in my area of responsibility. Fourth, the committee asked for an assessment of rotary wing industrial base and its ability to support Army modernization and sustainment. While no budget is without risk, I'm confident the request before you represents what we consider acceptable risk to the Rotary Wing industrial base. With the help of Congress, the Army has used multi-year procurement contracts as a means to both achieve significant cost savings and ensure industrial base stability. I would ask for the committee's support of the Army's FY22 request for new multi-year procurement authority for both the Apache and Black Hawk aircraft. Fifth, the committee requested an overview of the Army's aircraft survivability systems. Aircraft survivability is, of course, a critical element of the Army's modernization and readiness efforts to equip the force and maintain dominance. The aircraft survivability portfolio provides advanced laser defeat capabilities such as the Common Infrared Countermeasure System, which will be an enduring system. For other systems, I would request discussing that in a different setting. Lastly, the committee asks us to provide any other budget details and programs you believe merit attention to include notable acquisition reform efforts. I think this budget request reflects a careful balance, as I mentioned, between funding for enduring and future modernization. With respect to authorities, we're grateful to you and your colleagues on the committee for reform initiatives that have been instrumental in our efforts to streamline and gain efficiencies in the acquisition process. This includes our use of middle-tier acquisition authority for rapid prototyping to accelerate efforts linked to our modernization priorities. We have also used other transaction authority, or OTAs, to help streamline the acquisition research activities, prototype projects, and follow-on production. In both of these areas, you have my commitment that the Army will use these authorities conservatively and only where needed to accomplish our modernization objectives. You also have my commitment to ensure appropriate internal Army oversight measures are in place to monitor use of these authorities. Let me close by saying that realization of our modernization efforts is highly dependent on what is in the Army's FY22 budget request. The investments in this budget request complement and reinforce the Army's modernization efforts you have so far steadfastly supported. The key is predictable, adequate, timely, and sustained funding to ensure the United States Army remains the best equipped land force in the world. I sincerely appreciate your time today and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephanie.
Thank you. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of myself, Lieutenant General Mark Wise, the Deputy Commandant for Aviation, and Rear Admiral Andrew Loisel, Director of Air Warfare, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the Department of Navy's 2022 budget request for Rotary Aviation. We are pleased to testify alongside our Department of Army and Department of Air Force colleagues. Navy and Marine Corps forces operate forward and conduct a broad range of military missions in support of the joint force. The Department Rotary craft capability is a key enabler of our naval mobility. When coupled with air-capable ships, these aircraft provide speed, range, and flexibility to give our nation unmatched global reach and expeditionary agility. Their versatility is unmatched. Rotorcraft transport Marines, sailors, equipment, and supplies from ships and land bases to amphibious assault and for operations ashore. Rotorcraft pilots make up more than 50% of our naval aviators, who support a broad range of missions from anti-submarine warfare to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Our rotorcraft are ready to fight tonight, and going forward, they will remain the workhorses of the future naval force. Over the past year, we took delivery of 33 new Rotary aircraft, and we procured 56 more aircraft during the year. We also completed, just recently, the initial operational testing of the VH-92 Alpha presidential helicopter. To continue this progress toward the Commandant's Force Design 2030 initiative, as well as the Chief of Naval Operations vision for distributed maritime operations, the FY22 budget requests funds for the procurement of 53 new manned rotorcraft. While supporting the initial production of 53-kilo King Stallion helicopters, it also prioritizes recapitalization of the helicopter training fleet through continued procurement of the TH-73 Alpha training aircraft. The department is scheduled to take delivery of our very first TH-73 Alpha later this week. And a total of 52 of those aircraft are planned for delivery by the end of 2021. The FY22 budget also continues investment in modernization and service life extensions for our MH-60 and H-1 fleets that are foundational to the Navy and Marine Corps helicopter concept of operations. Modernization programs for these platforms are focused on survivability and sensor networks and communication that will keep the platforms technically relevant as we look to develop the future vertical lift systems that will replace them. Overall, this budget represents the deliberate, informed development of a modernized, integrated, and all-domain naval force for the future fight. It requires us to think differently, move faster, and prioritize each dollar to meet an uncertain environment. As we focus on building this all-domain naval force to address our pacing threat presented by our strategic competitors, we thank the Congress and this subcommittee for your continued leadership and support. And with that, we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Costello, please. Would you hit your microphone or?
Can you hear me now?
Great, thank you.
Sorry about that. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of myself and Major General Moore, we thank you for having us here today to provide testimony on the Department of the Air Force's Fiscal Year 22 Rotary Wing Aviation budget request. Additionally, thank you for your continued leadership and dedication to the United States military and the Department of the Air Force's 689,000 total force airmen and guardians serving around the world today. Our nation faces a complex set of current and future security challenges that require us to think different and act different, and with urgency. Our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown, has articulated what is at stake. He has stated that unless we make significant changes to the Air Force's programmed force, we will not meet the pacing threat of China in 2030. And unless something changes, we will not be able to accomplish the Air Force's core missions in the future operating environment. If we are to modernize to address the emerging threat, we must efficiently use resources tied to our outdated and underperforming platforms and weapon systems which are decreasing in relevance today and will be irrelevant in the future. We must strike a balance between risk in the near term and risk in the future. The Department of the Air Force rotorcraft are key components of the National Defense Strategy's lethal force modernization effort. Our rotorcraft are integral across a range of operations, including modern and reliable personnel recovery, special operations, nuclear security, and continuity of government. Thanks to the support of this subcommittee, we've made great strides in our efforts to improve rotorcraft readiness and set the tone for modernization. But there remains work to be done. The fiscal year 2022 budget continues investment in the Department of the Air Force critical rotorcraft modernization programs. As you're aware, the Department of the Air Force is the only service with a dedicated force organized, trained, and equipped to execute theater-wide personnel recovery. To accomplish this vital mission, we must continue to sustain, support, and upgrade the aging HH-60G fleet until we can fully recapitalize with the HH-60W Jolly Green II. The HH-60G retirements began this year with a continued retirement timeline that aligns with completion of fielding 105 HH-60W rotorcraft in FY27. The first operational unit has already been received. The first production HH-60W was delivered on June 8th of this year. The FY22 President's budget request adds 14 HH-60W aircraft to the 51 that are already funded. The MH-139A program is an element of the Air Force Nuclear Enterprise Reform Initiative and also supports operational airlift within the National Capital Region. The MH-139A offers significant capability increases in areas of speed, range, endurance, payload, and survivability. This program will deliver up to 80 replacement helicopters, training devices, and associated support equipment to replace the legacy UH-1Ns. While technical issues have delayed the FAA certification, we are confident Boeing can make the necessary changes to minimize schedule delays going forward. To meet the challenges of a highly contested environment, we are also developing the next generation of vertical takeoff and landing platforms Through AFWorks, Agility Prime, we've put more than $100 million on contract with over 20 electric vertical takeoff and landing industry partners to move toward fielding this transformative commercial technology for distributed logistics and personnel transport. Early investment in this technology will allow us to influence system design, foster industry growth, and accelerate fielding. We thank you for your leadership and support and are eager to work with this subcommittee to secure our nation's vital interest. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, each of you. Very much appreciate it. We're going to work through, again, just the votes here, and we're going to take whatever time is necessary. We value what you do each and every day and your time. And certainly our TAL staff who do such a wonderful job keeping us informed are focused on this. And please do not take the little bit of disruption of any way diminishing what you do each and every day. And with that, I'd like to start out with questions. Myself, Mrs. Hartzler, and then we'll go to both the remote and here. Ms. Bush, we've had conversation literally over years concerning the Chinook. And again, this year, some of the deferments that were going on versus the original vision of the Block 2 upgrades. We had the previous discussion about the heavy lift for the Army and when that decision was to be made. Let's make sure that we clear it up on the record. The decision for what you're going to do is in year 23? Because this is, we had the conversation and had much discussion. I just make sure we're clear on this.
Sir, my understanding of the Army's previous decision that still holds is that that was a calendar year 2023 decision.
Calendar year versus budget year, and forgive us for throwing that off. Obviously, developing 2 new programs at one time is challenging at best. We're trying to minimize that, and what you've done preparing for it is truly noteworthy. However, the time frame going on is you potentially could have 3 going on, which could present some challenges. When you expect to get the funding for 21, the authorization, you expect to put those under contract by the end of this fiscal year or this calendar year?
This fiscal year, sir.
Okay. It makes a difference. If you're listening to this, it gets confusing, but it's incredibly important we start looking at that. Thank you. Really appreciate that. What I'm going to do is try to get everybody in at least for one, and we're going to go multiple rounds. This way, we can have some more continuity. Mrs. Hartzler?
Yes, thank you. Lieutenant General Peterson, I'm interested in the status of the UH-60M upgrade program. As you know, Whiteman Air Force Base currently has UH-60Ls and have been promised the delivery of UH-60Ms in FY 2023 to replace this aging fleet. So can you assure me that the decrease in procurement of UH-60Ms in the FY 2022 budget will not impact this fielding strategy and timeline?
Struggling with the systems here. Ranking Member, thank you for that question. And the first of the 135th, as well as the third of the 238th with the HH-60 medevac variants are still on track for their FY 23-24 fielding, phased fieldings, consistent with our continued investment in the Mike model program. 2 very distinguished units. I had the pleasure of actually serving with and helping mobilize portions of those in my previous assignments. So we are not relenting from our commitments, particularly with our National Guard units, to stay on track with our modernization efforts. And our chief has been very emphatic about that. So we are maintaining that momentum and focus.
Great. That's great news. Thank you very much.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone for participating today. I have a general question to start with, and I guess it would be directed to General Wise. You know, in previous committee hearings, especially with fixed wing and the different components, we've heard of the concerns of a decrease in the number of, I guess, pilots that are graduating from our pilot programs and a shortage of pilots to fly our fixed-wing aircraft, and the projected recruitment and successful graduation of pilots to fly those aircraft. Looking at the overall, rotary wing request in this budget, is there any concerns about producing enough rotary pilots coming out of our training locations to fly these new rotary wing aircraft that we want to procure?
Sir, thank you for the question. The short answer to your question for rotary wing pilots is we're actually in pretty good shape with regard to rotary wing. I would say that our current manning is within the squadrons ranges for all of our type model series, from 96% manned to 86% at the low end, and we consider healthy at 85. So we're healthy in all regards, but that's, as you indicate, not something you want to rest on.
Sure.
So we spend a lot of time with our training folks, Sinatra, that works with Admiral Lewis L., and we watch our production rates to ensure that we're meeting our goals, to make sure that we don't drop any lower or we see leading indicators of they're coming. And right now we're still producing at a rate that we should stay healthy for the foreseeable future on the rotary wing side.
Great. Sure. Thank you. Well, let me shift. I represent Hawaii and, of course, Indo-PACOM. And looking at, and this is could be a question for anyone on the committee, but looking at Admiral Aguilino and previous Admiral Davidson's and the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and the rapidly building Chinese military and what they're doing out in the Western Pacific, how do we see this budget request for the modernization and the future investment of vertical lift capability, new and the replacement of our aging rotary fleet to play into the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and how we would fight a war in the Western Pacific that is largely, geographically challenged with, vast oceans and areas that we need to travel. How do you foresee that playing out in these investments that we're making with rotary wing aircraft that could have air refueling capability, could have the capability for multiple crews so that they can extend their ranges and their distances, and some of those challenges as we take those rotary aircraft into the areas of vulnerability based on the defensive systems and the weapons that China has?
Be happy to take a crack at that.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for that question and the insights associated with that. From the Army's perspective, FLRAA and FARA, our FVL signature initiatives, are tailor-made for the extended ranges and the dynamics and the threat of that emergent fight. Both FLRAA and FARA are absolutely vital to our modernization efforts. FARA is fulfilling the #1 gap in the Army aviation capability with a dedicated, purpose-built armed reconnaissance aircraft. The key points to be made with FLRAA and FARA is they both extend our reach with absolutely unprecedented speed, range, endurance, and equally as important, the effects of long-range precision munitions and other air-launched effects. And these capabilities combined with a networked kill chain, a joint kill chain, will allow us to project capability from unprecedented standoff and deliver stand-in effects. Those will present multiple dilemmas to our foes, and they're going to provide exceptional options to our joint force commanders. The high-fidelity modeling that we have done and could share in another forum with you clearly and empirically demonstrates the value of these capabilities against near-peer threats and in the specific areas that you referenced. So thank you.
Thank you, General Mahalo, Chair.
We have 6 minutes and 50 seconds. Do you want to go for it, or do you want to come back?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask one question.
Okay, then we recognize you
Closed
for
at 4:10, right?
5 minutes.
Yep, okay. Well, General Peterson, I actually was just about to ask you that same question, so thank you, but I did want to pass along, General Holmes from Tennessee sent me a note to send his regards. Yeah, I know, a good friend of both of ours. So I'll move to Ms. Costello and Major General Moore. It has been very interesting to watch the work that the Air Force has done with the Agility Prime program. Can you give the committee a brief description of what Agility Prime is, as well as some of the results that have been produced by the program?
Can you hear me? Agility Prime is a way that we use our S&T money, our small business money, to get industry that's out there investing their own money on new technologies, and especially in this case with the electric lift capabilities that they might be investing in for other reasons, and seeing where that can benefit our military. So if they found a way for electric battery life to last longer, that would be beneficial for us. If they found a better way to sustain and support and have lower cost for sustainment, that's something we're looking at. So there have been multiple companies that we've invested, given money to, allowed them to use our ranges and go off and demonstrate their capability, work on getting certifications for airworthiness, and with the expectation that there will be uses for that capability in the future. And we're working with our operators to see where there are good matches, if you will, for that. And it's proven to be very interesting, and industry is quite interested in participating in that because they would like to be able to help the Department of Defense in the future, and they do see that.
Okay, I'd like to just put in a plug for University of Tennessee Space Institute. I know they're working on some of the problems with battery and power source issues, so we're glad to help out. If you want to stop there?
Yeah, but we're going to have to recess. We're going to take 2 votes. Just to bring it to your attention, we were just told that former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld passed away. Certainly somebody who gave very much to this country. With that, we'll recess and we'll be back in a short while.
He was trying earlier.
I think I take better care of my things. My light works.
Hello? Hello?
We'll call this committee hearing back to order. We understand Mr. Horsford is on WebEx. Can you hear me, Steve? Steve, going once, going twice, and you'll get back to us. Obviously, people are in between votes, and we appreciate again your indulgence. So that's it's back to me. Thank you. Number of things that have gone on, and I want to go to you, Mr. Bush, and talk about the multi-year request. And why is this important? Obviously, timing, complexity, but generally cost is a big factor. Why is this important, this programs that you indicated that we go for multi-year on that?
So, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, one reason, of course, is cost savings. So, the Army's current estimate that delivered to the committee for Black Hawk and Apache combined is $500 million that could be over the 5 years of the, over the 5 years of the multi-years. So that's one reason, and we would...
It's a big one.
Yes, and possibly, hopefully be able to keep that and invest it in other aviation. The second reason is industrial-based stability and predictability. It is which is where you get the cost savings. They're able to do long-term contracts for things and get discount prices. It also ensures the Army has those production lines running, and then we have two known production lines that'll be firm.
Thank you. Actually, that leads right into my second question about our industrial base. We're always going through changes, evaluating new technologies coming before us. But at the end of the day, having the industrial base within the control of the United States, and that has an asterisk next to it because, you know, this is incredibly important. We found out about the supply chain and vulnerabilities. But I wanted to talk to you about the industrial partners, particularly on our future vertical lift. There are some major contractors, obviously, who are doing very well. But when we shift away from some of the, I don't like using the term legacy, but platforms that have been used for a while, sometimes we get down to one supplier for a critical part. We don't do this alone. We do it with our industrial partners. When we look at the future vertical lift, it's a program that you're reducing risk. We've had some great demonstrators. Talk to me about the industrial base, if you would, General, and how important that is, particularly when we look at developing that next generation of workforce who hears the same narrative day in, day out. To make it in America, you got to go to college. But you know what? That's great, but somebody's got to build the things, and that's where it comes back to that industrial base. Would you shed some light on our industrial partners?
Thanks very much, Chairman, for that question. First, the necessity and the vitality of our industrial base directly influences our enduring readiness. We don't build our own parts for the most part. We don't have the sustainability and repair on our own without our industrial partners, our industry partners. So it's absolutely vital across our enduring fleet, and that's the term that we are using for those aircraft that we may not be modernizing substantially, but we know that we are going to retain them in our fleet for a substantial amount of time, and they have an important contribution to make. The Apache, the Black Hawk, the Chinook, they're part of our enduring fleet. We are not divesting comprehensively of those. They have a place. And we need to maintain those aircraft ready and have part streams and repair parts for those for the foreseeable future. We work very closely with our teammates in ASALT as well as Army Materiel Command to ensure that we have viability in the industrial base to include suppliers for those. With respect to the workforce, I've had the pleasure of visiting locations at all of our major manufacturers and meet the craftsmen and women on the floor who provide us with these incredible world-class capabilities that we've taken to combat and brought home again, and thank them for their contributions, their commitment, and their part that they play in our national defense. So the workforce in our industry partners are an absolute vital portion of our overall efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, and certainly it should certainly be noted that during COVID, obviously the servicemen and women never got a break, but for those in our industrial base who went to work every day, particularly early on when they had little knowledge of how it was spreading, we thank them also, because we would not be here today if somehow this industrial base stopped, and we really appreciate all those who put themselves out there. Just want to shift quickly over to Ms. Costello. Subcommittee obviously has been supportive of the Army and SOCOM-led efforts for the degraded visual environment, or the DV system for helicopters. And we're really pleased that the Air Force joined the effort, and I talked about how we can work together, and budgeted the system for the current 8H-60G helicopter. Now in the 22 requests, it's canceled. Can you share with us the thought process on that we geared up and now we're gearing down, or quite frankly stopping? Give me a little bit of history of why we are where we are today.
So as the timeline for the aircraft moved out to the right, and the timeline for integration of that, basically the return on investment of when we'd be able to install it before we would be, removing the aircraft from our inventory became part of the equation. And that led to, assessing the risk of what we were going to fund and not fund. And therefore, our combatant commander looked at that and decided to not fund at this point for that particular aircraft. I don't know if you'd like to add anything more relative to the divestiture, because that does have part to do with the equation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So as we changed the divestiture profile for the HH-60G and compared that, as Ms. Costello said, to the install timeline and the amount of investment, it just did not appear to be a good use of taxpayer dollars. It doesn't mean we don't believe in the system, and it doesn't mean we don't believe that it's very productive for the pilots and very helpful for them. It just didn't make sense in this particular case for this particular aircraft. But we do share, Mr. Chairman, your thoughts that it is a significant enhancement for the pilots, and we'll continue to look as we go forward with new fleets at incorporating that into either the baseline configuration or into a modification later on.
So the dollars that were expended, they just don't get lost. That technology is being forwarded to the newer platform?
So we have the opportunity to incorporate that into the new aircraft. It is not a part of the baseline, to my knowledge, but we do have the opportunity to incorporate it in. And as we're able with available funds, that's something that we certainly will look at, because, as I said, Mr. Chairman, we do share your sense that it is something that's helpful. We have funded the HH-60W to what we believe is the minimum combat configuration. There are additional modifications that could go onto the airplane, but at this point, with the resources that we have, not all of the modifications that were originally planned for the HH-60W are included in the current aircraft.
So I understand the timeline, but how does it become less of a safety issue that you wouldn't incorporate it?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I would say that. First of all, I don't know that I would say that it is that it's a requirement for a safe aircraft. It is an enhancement to the aircraft that does improve safety, but we don't believe it's a safety of flight issue to not have it on the aircraft. And as I mentioned, that technology will be available for the HH-60W, but as we accelerated the timeline for the G model compared to the installation timeline, it just didn't seem to make it didn't seem to be fiscally responsible.
Okay, I don't understand. Let me hold up on that and defer to Mrs. Hartzler. Thanks.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Wise, I'd like to discuss the CH-53K Heavy Lift Helicopter Program and how the Marine Corps plans to control costs now and through the life cycle of the program. Right now, we're buying a helicopter with a higher unit cost than the F-35. CH-53K costs were hovering around $125 million a copy in FY21. Costs should decrease once the program gets to full rate production, but now I see that the Marine Corps plans to procure only 9 aircraft this year, down from the 11 projected in FY21 FIDIP. Decreasing procurement numbers has become a trend over the past few years. Combined with the Marine Corps' current plan to reduce from 8 to 5 squadrons, is it also the Marine Corps plan to truncate the CH-53K procurement at a number below the current requirement for 200 aircraft? And if so, how will this impact that current unit cost per aircraft?
Senior Ranking Member, I very much appreciate the question. For the control cost piece of it, I mean, that's, as you know, we've attacked that in 2 directions. One is trying to drive down the unit cost, which is worthy of discussion. The unit cost on Lot 5, which was this year, is $97 million per copy. Where we are going in 22, it appears it's going to be about 94. So it is on the way down, and at this point, it is down below the cost of an F-35 and trending in the right direction. So a lot of the reductions in numbers over recent history really had to do with trying to do risk reduction initiatives to get through some of the challenges. But right now, we've actually had great success in getting through those challenges. Like engine gas reingestion has been, we're actually past that now. So as we get ready to start into IOT&E, so operational tests, we're actually starting next month. We're seeing some fairly impressive readiness rates for the test birds that are going to be doing that operational test. So there is some good news stories as we have done the risk reduction initiatives and helped driven down costs for procurement. It also goes into the sustainment side of the house, things like performance-based logistics, starting early with that platform to get some of those parts into performance-based logistics contracts to keep driving down the cost and incentivize industry to drive down the cost. So there's a lot of good things happening right there. As far as the force design question and reduction, the original requirement was about 220 aircraft. It was reduced to 200 in order to meet affordability. So as we look at force design and how that will affect that program, if there is a reduction, it will probably be less than we would normally think had we actually bought the program of record that was the requirement to begin with. But as we get to determining what that number is, any reduction would not happen until the end of the life cycle or the end of the program buy. So that would, working with industry, reduce the likelihood that costs would rise. Depending on the last lot buys.
So you're saying you haven't decided yet whether you're going to go below 200, and that'll be determined in the future, and if so, it'll be the last lot that gets cut?
Yes, ma'am. It is, if we do, and it is possible, absolutely. It just won't be as low as you might think if you did like the straight math for it, because of the requirement being 220 initially. And part of that was also based on an attrition rate that had not been updated to current models. So it could go below 200, and it may, but I'm not sure it's going to go grossly below.
You're not sure it will go closely below what?
Grossly below. I don't think it's going to go
okay.
A large
Clear
number.
as mud, all of this general terms here. Okay, so thank you. Last question, Mr. Bush. It's my understanding that the Army and the contractor on the improved turbine engine program, the ITEP, have worked through the manufacturing difficulties posed in the last year by COVID to keep ITEP on schedule. However, previous year plans to accelerate the schedule have now been ruled infeasible. How confident are you that ITEP can remain on schedule for integration onto the Future Attack and Reconnaissance Aircraft, the FARA, And what risk do you see for the program in FY22 funding if it is not provided at the requested levels? And what risk would a CR pose to the program timelines?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. So a couple of those I'm going to have to get back to you on, but let me see best I can do here. Of course, the engine is vital for the Apache and Black Hawk future, as well as the FARA. So it's a program the Army's committed to, as you know, went through many years with 2 vendors, and now we have one that did encounter COVID-related, in their case, difficulties. I think any reduction from the 22 request would put our current plan at risk. But as far as a detailed estimate regarding potential additional delays, I would have to get back to you on that, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you. I understand we have Mr. Horsford, a gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Recognized for
Mr.
5
Chairman,
minutes.
and to the ranking member.
I haven't heard it. I have had problems.
Thank you as well to our witnesses for your service and testimony today. Army National Guard aviators in my home state of Nevada play an important role in protecting the communities in my district from the ever-increasing threat posed by wildfires. I'm very proud of the work done every year by both our Army National Guard UH-60 Black Hawk and CH-47 Chinook air crews, as well as the C-130 pilots of the Nevada Air National Guard. Aerial firefighting provides the Nevada Division of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service with an important resource that can protect firefighters on the ground by making precise drops that often prove critical in shaping the fight against wildfires. While it is not their primary purpose, the aerial firefighting missions conducted by the Nevada National Guard are some of the most dangerous missions they fly, to include flying in combat. For that reason, I think it's vital that the crews flying these dangerous missions have access to the most capable platforms and modern systems available, both in my state and across the West. So, Mr. Bush and General Peterson, how does the Army factor in missions like aerial firefighting into basing decisions for upgraded UH-60s, given the consistent increase in demand for these types of missions and the extreme risks that they pose to air crews?
Thank you very much for that question. First, I'd like to share your enthusiastic support and appreciation for the role that our Army National Guard and our Army Reserve units play in the defense of our homeland and in vital civil support missions. With respect to specific prioritization for fielding of modernization capabilities, those fielding decisions within the Army National Guard are prioritized by the Army Guard and the Guard Bureau with consultation and cooperation with the Army staff, but primarily based on the contributions they will make to our wartime missions. For those combat aircraft, that is their primary contribution, although their day in, day out mission is very vital and is clearly recognized. The modernization priorities for our combat platforms is largely based on the wartime traces, the contributions that those organizations will make in a large-scale combat operation fight.
Thank you. On a similar note, it's in my understanding that Special Operations Command will soon complete the integration of the Degraded Visual Environment Pilotage System, or the DVE. Given the similar issues around the risk of brownout or otherwise severely degraded visual environments faced by air crews conducting aerial firefighting missions, I'm curious if the Army has considered building the systems to National Guard crews tasked with this mission. Does the Army currently intend to procure additional DVE systems for National Guard aviation units who frequently conduct aerial firefighting missions?
I don't think so.
That's another great question. With respect to our DVE investments right now in our developmental program, we currently have 15 of the developmental systems fielded on HH-60 medevac Blackhawks and 25 fielded with our Special Operations Forces. Interestingly, my most recent actual flight in an aircraft just a few months ago was in a DVE-equipped MH-47G at Fort Campbell, and the contribution of that system to a combat profile as well as enhancing safety is substantial and is very relevant. We are using these initial prototype or developmental fieldings to inform a long-term strategy and long-term requirements, and we have an initial requirements document currently in staffing that will inform longer-term Army strategy and investments. I do not believe that we have openly discussed and considered the contribution this could make in aerial firefighting, but we will certainly take that for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you and the committee to improve the safety of the crews flying these dangerous missions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, and I yield back.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate those questions. Firefighting, things that get smoke, unfamiliar areas, it certainly reminds us of a couple of the accidents. I know the one in Iraq and certainly at our base in Afghanistan with the cable going up, incredibly important. So Mrs. Hartzler doesn't have any other questions. I have one, and this is sort of I don't want to say a slow pitch, but certainly to get your feedback on that. When we look at the innovation and technology upgrades on many of what we're looking for in the future in the Rotary Wing, incorporating capabilities like unmanned flight on major new platforms, and some are much more focused than others, but in any of these, the complexity is something that is all balanced with the risk, the time, the cost on these platforms. Would each of the services discuss what innovation your services expect out of these future systems, and how far along you are in the research development, and what degree you think unmanned capabilities will be part of your future fleet? Let's start with the Army.
Mr. Chairman, I'll start, and if I could, turn to General Peterson on requirements. So Army does have multiple unmanned aircraft programs underway. The overall, if I could describe it this way, is more of a thinking of them as a part of a team with manned aircraft. So they're not operating completely independently in most cases, but teamed with manned aircraft, including even small UAS that are launched through for example, the Air Launched Effects S&T and experimentation efforts that can possibly do different missions for us. So I think moving along those lines to where we can get better teaming between manned and unmanned aircraft, I think is still the Army's overall plan, while other efforts are underway. And I'd turn to General Peterson to talk about requirements.
Specifically, some of the baseline technologies that are already being explored and demonstrated in both FLRAA and FARA will provide a foundation for us to move forward with either optionally manned, partially manned, or advanced elements of unmanned teaming. Fly-by-wire technology with our flight controls, the digital backbone, the modular open system architecture that allows us to integrate emergent capabilities in our aircraft for the future will all provide a foundation and a launching point for these options or opportunities. Additionally, the Army's continued investment in AI and machine learning will provide us the technological foundation for the decision-making or the automation that will allow these capabilities to move forward, not only in our rotary wing platforms, but in other aspects of our advanced combat capabilities and modernization priorities.
You'll be ready for it, and the technology you believe will be there in an appropriate way at an appropriate cost?
We are absolutely investing in it and making progress. I would hesitate to give a date time group for integration or implementation of these capabilities, but they are clearly a priority for our continued research and development.
Thank you. Our Navy, Marines.
Yes, sir. I'll start and pass it to my service brethren. As I think you're aware, we have a Department of Navy unmanned campaign plan that lays out those technologies and roadmaps to get us to the place where, like our Army counterparts, we have that manned-unmanned teaming of the future. A little different, maybe in our case, manned and unmanned aircraft, but also unmanned with ships and amphibious ships, even submarines, that connection of unmanned aircraft with both manned aircraft and ships. So with that introduction, I'll pass it over to General Wise.
I would say for the Marine Corps, the amount of investment into unmanned systems is increasing clearly for us. We're going into the MQ-9 A roles now, but the other areas that we're going to are not just ISR. So a lot of the work that's being done by General Peterson's team, and actually I spend quite a bit of time with General Barry as well on development of things that are going to have logistics applications, because as we look at the vastness of the Pacific and trying to do distributed operations with, capacity constraints, can we do it with more unmanned opportunities? But part of the constraint there is not that we don't want to do it, there's some of the technology limitations that General Peterson was talking to, like the things that make it truly autonomous. Can I not just get there, but can I sense the zone and clear the zone and sit down so that I can, get rid of the payload and go back and do it again? So a lot of opportunities coming. It's just maturing things to a point where we can invest with a reasonable certainty of success. But we are going in that direction. Sure.
Thank you.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, from the Navy side, we are already implementing our Fire Scout plan. So we've got rotary wing unmanned already in the B and the C version. The C is really about the size of a Bell 407 helicopter, so it's large, and so you get some decent range out of it, utilizing the systems to do surveillance and that type of stuff. It's also part of our replacement plan for the MH-53 and utilizing the mine hunting capabilities of the Fire Scout system. So that is a lead-in to an overall family of unmanned systems. I had the pleasure of commanding the USS George H.W. Bush when we got the very first arrested landing of a fixed-wing airplane unmanned. And now we've just had our first plug of an F-18 into an unmanned aerial refueling tanker. And so we're making some good progress. I'm very pleased with the way we're going, and CNO is all in with our unmanned campaign plan. And so we see a significant amount of development in our future.
Thank you. Ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question. There are some use cases in the Air Force for unmanned aircraft of a rotary wing nature. Agility Prime is looking at eVTOL, for example, and there are some great use cases for that. As just a quick example, if you think about the range at Nellis and the need to resupply or move things around on that range, and you can do it very inexpensively with something like eVTOL. Most of the use cases that we have, however, are not in the rotary wing world, but we are exploring, obviously, both autonomous aircraft and manned-unmanned teaming. I think the XQ-58 is probably the most powerful example that we have. It's already flying, and what it tends to do really, really well is perform as a node in the airborne, in the advanced battle management system, a communications relay, a sensor, and as we look to a future that is enabled by a sensing grid, many of the parts of that grid will likely be formed by autonomous aircraft. So we certainly are invested in this area, and it's something that we're paying attention to. It's something that's important with us. The rotary wing aspect of it is not quite the heart of the use case that we have, but we do have some examples, and Ms. Costello has a recent one of those. I'll pass to her pending any questions you have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And specifically within our Agility Prime program, they are looking at autonomy as one of the areas of interest. So with all of the companies that they're working, autonomy is a focus area. Since December of 2020, the Kitty Hawk example, autonomy for medevac exercise, they actually matured and optimized the heavy-side prototype with autonomous flight and demonstrated the first medical evacuation by an electric aircraft. So that's the sort of thing they're investing in, and we hope to mature it and be able to leverage it in the future. And of course, we're looking at an area of interest of unmanned cargo type capability also. And so those are the areas Agility Prime is working. Thank you.
Mrs. Hartzler and I have to go vote, but I understand my colleague from Hawaii has a question, so I want to thank you in advance for your cooperation and working with us. But Mr. Kelly will be wrapping it up, and again, appreciate what each of you are doing and who you represent to keep our nation safe. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, and mahalo for giving me this opportunity to ask a few more questions that I had, and then we will wrap it up. I'll start with General Peterson. Actually, let me go back to a first question I have for General Wise. Sir, you know, I live on the island of Hawaii, but I represent Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, and this is not an issue that is just unique to Hawaii, and that's helicopter noise, especially around Kaneohe Marine Corps Base. And as someone who in a previous life operated C-17s out of K-Bay for quite a while, I know those noise complaints from our communities out there. But as you know, we're looking at the future of Kaneohe Marine Corps Base, especially during weekend and nighttime training, which is required to maintain readiness. The aircraft and helicopter flights can be loud, and you know the base is great. They're trying to do things out there to mitigate that, but I just wanted to ask on behalf of the community organizations and the neighborhood boards that represent the windward side of the island of Oahu, are you committed to working with those organizations, those neighborhood boards, or at least through the base commanders at Kaneohe Marine Corps Base to address their concerns about noise and safety, and if there's anything you want to add to that? I'm sure they would appreciate hearing it from you.
Sir, I appreciate the question, and I do assure you that the long-standing relationship we've had with the community is I think, been very positive and for all the right reasons. And I would also say that from a course rules perspective, as you're well aware, trying to make sure that we minimize the opportunity to create challenges with the community, we always try to avoid that, and sometimes we don't. But the commitment is still there to look at every opportunity to make sure that we are good partners and good community partners, because we do enjoy our relationship very much there, and we will continue to work with them.
Thank you for that. And as someone who represents the windward side, I know that they appreciate Kaneohe Marine Corps Base and our military friends and families that live on the island of Oahu. Thank you. Okay, over to General Peterson. The Army has consistently discussed the need for speed and range as well as survivability when it comes to future vertical lift aircraft. Could you explain to the committee why speed and range are so critical to the future long-range assault aircraft and how this new technology will enable the Army to leverage that aircraft as a power projection platform? And then how will this capability assist the Army with its strategy in the Indo-Pacific theater in that great power competition?
Thank you for that question. Essentially in basic terms, what we are striving to accomplish is doubling the performance of what we have appreciated and has been exceptionally relevant for decades. Speed and range will give us an absolutely unprecedented capability, one that we have never experienced before, to disaggregate, aggregate, operate from relative sanctuary, and then project effects as well as forces at distances that our enemies will not be able to predict and not be able to counter when we do this in mass in the face of that determined adversity. The speed allows us to close with our objectives at a rate where we get inside of our foes' decision cycles, and gives us the opportunity to concentrate those effects at the place of our choosing. The ranges in the Indo-Pacific region are obviously vast, and it adds to our relevance and our contribution in that area as well.
What is the impact, on that note, of speed and range on the medevac mission, where we need to, get wounded soldiers to critical care as quickly, as early, as safely as possible?
It's absolutely game-changing. It gives us the opportunity to extract wounded soldiers much more quickly and get them to the higher levels of care. It gives us also much more reach without support, sustainment, and exposure of others to extend those legs, as we've had to do in other theaters in recent years. So that extended reach, again, gets the wounded soldier to the competent medical care much more quickly, but also reduces the logistical burden for those extended ranges to provide that capability.
Okay, thank you for that.
And if I may,
Sure.
please, Mr. Bush has one brief comment as well he'd like to follow up on. Thank
Sir, if I may, I did want to second everything that you just heard, but also mentioned I was remiss in my previous answer in not mentioning the tremendous innovation in the commercial sector in unmanned aircraft that the Army and the other services, I'm sure, are drawing on. There's just as much R&D out there as there is in the DoD. And the Army Futures Command in particular, I think, is doing a very good job of finding things and experimenting with things in the commercial sector for unmanned aircraft rather than us developing things from scratch, which I think, given the investments there in the private sector, is a really good approach.
Okay, thank you. Let me jump over last question for the Air Force. Ms. Costello and General Moore, earlier this month, General Hinault testified before the CPAR and Projection Forces Subcommittee that the Air Force is considering a vertical lift platform to replace the C-130 as it seeks to move away from fixed wing or fixed runway requirements. The General also said the Air Force is watching the Army Future Vertical Lift program when it comes to the development of vertical lift transport technology. How would the on-time fielding of an Army Future Vertical Lift transport aircraft, such as the Future Long-Range Assault Aircraft, benefit the Air Force as it looks to develop the next generation concepts? And when possibly would we see a potential vertical lift C-130 replacement fielded?
Well, thank you for the question. It certainly, as you spoke before about the distances in the Pacific, one of the things that we think will be a part of the need to perform well in the Pacific is the ability to move around between different places according to a concept we call agile combat employment. And if you accept that fixed runways are easy to find and therefore easy to target, particularly in the first and second island chain, they're all within range of Chinese ballistic missiles. The ability to operate in a runway independent way makes a great deal of sense and is an important use case. And I'm sure that's what General Hinault talked about. We are watching the Army Future Vertical Lift program very carefully because it could provide the mechanics behind how we could do this. As to when it would be fielded, I think that would depend on what its actual range and payload capabilities would be and when it delivers. But if you consider what the C-130, particularly the C-130H, can do in the Pacific, you would certainly want to look to the next generation of lift capability if you want to perform an agile combat employment type of operation. Does that get to your question, sir?
It does. And, I get excited about it as somebody who has about 1,000 hours in the C-130, the H-2 and the H-3. And as you know, we have C-130s down in Yokota. We could possibly look at other locations like Anderson for a potential unit. But, is this a type of aircraft that you see would potentially replace those older H's that we are looking at retiring? Or how would that complement the J models that we're investing in. Of course, newer C-130s that we're basing in the Pacific. Is this a type of aircraft that would be potentially looked at in that first, second island chain, Yokota, Anderson, and maybe some other areas?
Yes, sir. I think that would probably be the most powerful use case. And if you do consider a doubling of performance, now you potentially have an aircraft that can operate over the distances and therefore with the speed required to actually become agile in the Pacific. And I think that's what's going to be required if you consider the capabilities that China has to target fixed locations. And as well as speed and range performance, you really have to be able to get away from a runway if you're going to execute a concept like that successfully. So we're watching this closely and look forward to being able to leverage what the Army develops. I would see it as a complement to the J model. I would see that there still are use cases for the Js as well as for C-17s. Yep. Commercial partners play in that space as well up to a certain point. But I would see this as a complement that could add or augment the capabilities that we already have in terms of strategic and tactical lift.
This would be something that would be really totally new for the Air Force as well, having vertical lift with these types of aircraft, and a whole new training program that would be incorporating into those different Little Rock and Altus and the different bases where we're not even doing any of these things, and would have to incorporate that into those new programs.
It would, yes, sir, and I would expect that if we were going to do that, we would leverage our experience with the CV-22 as well as the experience that the Army has as they field a system like this, because it would, particularly the tactics and the techniques and procedures, but just the basic airmanship would be different than what we do today.
Thank you. Okay, well, on behalf of the chair and the full committee, we want to thank you for your testimony, your discussion that you provided the committee today. It's been a very dynamic day here on the Hill with having to step in and out of votes, but we sincerely appreciate your time, the attentiveness, your work you put into your testimony. So with that being said, this committee stands adjourned, and aloha.